The title of today's hearing is 21st Century Economy, Protecting the Financial System from Risks Associated with Climate Change, which begs the question, who is supposed to protect the financial system from these risks and how? In the view of at least some of my Democratic colleagues, the answers seem to be the Fed, the SEC, and other financial regulators.
Your volume's off. Here we go.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me now? I'm not on mute according to my screen.
I can hear you, Senator Toomey. This is Senator Smith.
Okay, thank you, Senator Smith. Cameron, can you hear me?
And
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Yep.
Pat, everybody else hears
like
you
there's
but
an
me.
issue
I
on
don't
the
know
German
quite
end.
what's wrong. Sorry about that.
Why don't I resume?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll resume. What I want to do is offer a different perspective. Just as we would not task the EPA with auditing corporate books, even of energy companies, financial regulation and supervision isn't meant for advancing environmental policy. As Fed Chairman Powell himself has said, society's broad response to climate change is for others to decide, in particular elected leaders. If Congress believes current environmental policies do not adequately address climate risk, then changes should be enacted through the legislative process, not through financial regulation. Of course, this should be the responsibility of Congress. It's Congress that's accountable to the American people and would take responsibility for the costly trade-offs if, for instance, we decided to rely more on expensive renewable energy rather than less expensive conventional energy. Regarding the Fed, the climate policy is clearly beyond the scope of its mission and authorities. The Fed was created to be independent and free from political influence. As one of today's witnesses, John Cochran, has observed, a central bank in a democracy is not an all-purpose do-good agency to subsidize what it decides to be worthy, defund what it dislikes, and force banks and companies to do the same, end quote. The Fed's recent actions on climate, however, suggest that this is the direction that some at the Fed would like to pursue. For example, the Fed's newly created committee that's focused exclusively on climate risk raises a number of questions. Although it was announced nearly 2 months ago, we still don't have any details on its objective or how it intends to achieve them. Similarly, Fed Governor Lael Brainerd has suggested the Fed may require banks to engage in, quote, climate scenario analysis, end quote, but she has not provided any specificity on the purpose or rationale or process for such an exercise. And this is in spite of the fact that banks already evaluate their risks and respond accordingly. By straying from its core mission and authorities in support of vague and ill-defined climate goals, the Fed's actions threaten to undermine its credibility and to betray its independence. Climate policy is also beyond the scope of the Fed's expertise. We know there are significant shortcomings and gaps in climate models and data. The Fed has acknowledged that historical climate data is insufficient to make accurate predictions of future climate scenarios. And climate researchers themselves have warned that their models are built for 100-year simulations, not projections of the immediate years or even decades ahead. Given the uncertainty within the climate community itself, why should we believe that the Fed has a greater understanding of climate risks than regulated institutions? The answer is, we should not. One recent paper by a group of climate researchers found that current climate models cannot provide financially meaningful information. The Fed shouldn't become a climate soothsayer any more than they should start regulating based on the risk of domestic instability, widespread famine, or other black swan events. As one of today's witnesses, Ben Zeiker, will explain in more detail, the Fed is not in a position to navigate the enormous uncertainties and complexities underlying climate models. Financial regulators just have no experience or expertise in environmental policy, and any attempt to impose new requirements will only result in the government picking winners and losers. The Fed should not follow the example of some other regulators engaged in mission creep, and nor should the SEC. I've warned that many on the left want the SEC to use its regulatory powers to advance a progressive social agenda, including on climate change. Now, under the SEC's acting chair, the agency is beginning to do exactly that. For example, earlier this month, the SEC announced the creation of a climate and ESG task force to scrutinize issuers' disclosure of climate risk. And on Monday, the acting SEC chair proposed a chilling and authoritarian idea. She argued the SEC should force companies to disclose any type of political advocacy spending because firms may, and I quote, state that they support climate-friendly initiatives, but have donated substantial sums to candidates with climate voting records inconsistent with such assertions, end quote. Well, inconsistent according to whom? I mean, what this really means is that these green-friendly companies may support some Republicans, and that's unacceptable. These actions represent a clear abuse of power and a politicization of the SEC's disclosure standard. The concept of materiality is the cornerstone of the disclosure-based regime under federal securities laws, and what matters is whether an issue is financially material to a reasonable investor. The real objective here seems to be to punish politically disfavored industries. By straying from beyond their mandates into the climate arena, financial regulators will pressure banks not to serve politically disfavored industries such as fossil fuel companies. Well, who's next? Gun manufacturers, conservative media, religiously minded businesses like Hobby Lobby? This is a wholly inappropriate use of financial regulation in an attempt to substitute political favoritism for private business decisions. Radical policies to force banks to cut off capital to these companies would not have a meaningful impact on the climate, as Dr. Zaker will testify, but will only raise energy prices for consumers. So I began my statement by asking who is supposed to protect the financial system from risks associated with climate change and how, or you could simply ask exactly what risks. The major threat to energy-related assets is not financial risk caused by weather-related events. It's the risk that unelected, unaccountable, woke regulators will misuse the levers of power in ways never imagined to remake society according to their politics. That result, political favoritism caused by regulatory abuse, that's what we really need to protect the financial system, business, and workers from.